Very good evening to you. Welcome to KTN Prime. Tonight, the focus is still on the fight against corruption. And today, the Jubilee administration, the Jubilee coalition rather, is introducing a new twist. We'll tell you all about it. This is KTN Prime. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's look at the top stories tonight.
So the country was taken through circus. Perceived corruption by one engineer Mangit.
It is raining. Madam Waiguru, we like you. We even appreciate you. We even acknowledge that you are committed and dedicated in your duty. Tafadhali, find your shade.
Waiguru's fate splits Kenyan ruling coalition as anti-corruption body begins questioning her officers.
The discussion between my team and the TSC of yesterday took place in a privileged environment and information provided on a need-to-know basis.
Kenya's Interior Secretary angry with media over reports of questionable expenditure. Regional leaders witness handover of power in Tanzania. And sending tourists to my motherland, Kenyan tour operator daring in Norway. National Assembly Majority Leader Edin Duale says Waiguru is a victim of a wider agenda by enemies of the Uhuru administration who want to paint cabinet secretaries as corrupt to taint the government's image. But even as Duale spoke at Parliament, another group of Jubilee politicians held a separate conference where they told the president it was time to let Waiguru go. Here are the details.
When Devolution Cabinet Secretary Anne Waiguru willingly presented herself to the Parliamentary Accounts Committee Wednesday afternoon, she was ready to clear her name from any corruption allegations leveled against her. But Thursday, the fallout from that proceeding is already creating a rift within the ranks of the ruling Jubilee coalition. One side of the Jubilee coalition, led by Majority Leader of the National Assembly, Edin Duale, came out strong to defend the honor of Anne Waiguru, insisting that the finger of blame should be pointed towards her permanent secretary instead.
Public officer under oath before a watchdog committee cannot come present an inventory captured in the Hansard and says so many things, and tomorrow comes back and says the document that I presented as an accounting officer is fake and does not reflect a government document.
The camp remains adamant that the Jubilee administration is well on its way to weed out all remnants of corruption cartels within government.
The international institutions, including the IMF, have demonstrated their confidence in the management of the Kenyan economy as late as today, when the IMF said Kenyan economy was better than those of the sub-Saharan Africa, growing in fact.
Another camp of legislators led by Mkurueni MP Kabando wa Kabando are reading from a different script, and their message is simple. The devolution CS should be shown the door.
Madam Waiguru, we like you. We even appreciate you. We even acknowledge that you are committed and dedicated in your duty. Tafadhali, find your shade. The El Nino is here with us. The political current and torrents are raining on us. The clowns are gathering every day. Find your shade, Uhuru Kenyatta. The path for Jubilee and for your leadership is the people, and the people are extremely angry on the ground.
Waiguru's latest plight apparently splitting the Jubilee House into two. This, even as a motion to have her ousted, sponsored by Nandi Hills MP Alfred Keter, continues to gather momentum ahead of next week's tabling.
I will not withdraw and I will not relent. Why? For simple reason, we have to change this country.
This latest fallout comes on a day the Planning Permanent Secretary Peter Mangiti at the Devolution Ministry appeared before the investigators at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. He was to answer to, among others, questions on the National Youth Service scandal that saw 791 million shillings lost. The Permanent Secretary remaining tight-lipped as to whether he was willing to step aside to allow for thorough investigation.
Are you resigning?
Well, I have no further comments to make.
You're the Chief Accounting Officer. Are you resigning?
Meanwhile, the report being compiled by the Parliamentary Accounts Committee in regards to graft allegations against Waiguru and her ministry will have to be presented in Parliament for a vote of approval. Timothy Otieno, KTN News.
So that story by Timothy Otieno forms the basis of our big question tonight when we're focusing on the Devolution Cabinet Secretary. We're asking, do you support the demand by some members of Parliament that President Uhuru Kenyatta should send Waiguru packing? What are your thoughts? Tweet us at KTN News, at KTN Kenya. You can send a short message to the number 22155. That number is absolutely free for you. Let us know what you think. I'd love to sample your views during this bulletin. All right, so let's see if you can get some answers to some of the questions that Kenyans have been raising in the last couple of days. We are speaking to Michael Orua. He's joining us from our I&M studio. He's from the Society for International Development. Michael, thank you so much for speaking to KTN Prime tonight. Looking at everything that has been happening in the country for the last couple of days, do you get the feeling that this government is committed to the fight against corruption?
Thank you for the question. Feelings, they say, can be a little bit erratic, but I think the general consensus in the country today is that there's something wrong in the fight against corruption, if ever there was a fight against corruption, that there's no political commitment to fight corruption and root it out of our public institutions and private spaces. There's no result to show in the fight against corruption except statements of intentions, and I think given that, there's really nothing worth writing home about in the struggle against corruption.
Apart from the statements that we've had, of course, from different leaders, including the president himself, do you get the feeling that there's a full commitment, that this government is willing to go the full length to fight corruption?
Linda, I wish they were willing to go the full length to fight corruption, because today corruption is the biggest obstacle to the transformation of this country and its potential. Whether you look at the security sector, whether you look at the service delivery, devolution, there's nothing that stands taller than corruption in undermining the potential, the transformative potential of Jubilee government, its manifesto, and therefore the quality of life of every Kenyans. And you know, I think if Jubilee could gather enough courage, if the state could gather enough courage to fight corruption, the Kenyans would be fully behind the government. But I don't think there is a political commitment to fight corruption. We need that demonstrated. Like I've said, we need to move from statements of intentions to actual action and corruption. It's almost 5 months since President gave one of the most important, if you say, iconic addresses to the Republic on a state of the nation. And he called on us and to join him in the fight against corruption. He said we are drawing a line. 5 months after, we have not heard from the president or any of his capable officers or the institutions charged with the responsibility of fighting corruption a progress report on what has happened on the list of shame.
So this is, let's now focus on the issue that every single Kenyan is talking about out there, and that is the issue of the Ministry of Devolution and whether or not the Cabinet Secretary Anne Waiguru needs to step aside, putting in mind every single thing that has been heard from her ministry, including the latest that we aired yesterday. In your view, do you think the Cabinet Secretary needs to step aside, and why?
It's an emphatic yes. not just the cabinet secretary, but any government official, and let me say senior government official, because to demonstrate political will, you have to start from the top. Every senior government official who has been charged with the responsibility of taking care of our resources must respect the oath of office and step aside, not because they are guilty, not because people do not dislike them, but in respect of the position they hold in trust on behalf of Kenyans. And the law is very clear on the threshold of leadership and integrity that is required of our public officers. So stepping aside is not an admission of guilt, but it is an admission that there is something wrong, something has gone wrong under my charge. I want to step aside and give the investigative authorities the free hand to ensure that they get to the bottom of this. At that point, I wish, therefore, to even congratulate the Cabinet Secretary for Devolution, who has been touted as #1 whistleblower. I would challenge her to step aside, having demonstrated the willingness to blow the whistle on the NYS scandal, to take the cue and step aside, because really it's distracting on the struggle against corruption in this country. I think those adversely mentioned in corrupt incidents, those under whose watch the public have lost money and resources, have an obligation in respect of their constitution and the office they hold in public trust to step aside and allow objective investigations.
To be fair, the Cabinet Secretary is on record saying she is not aware of the allegations that are being leveled against her. As a matter of fact, she says she's not the accounting officer, so why should she step aside?
This government told us that the Cabinet Secretaries would have complete powers in the determination of how their ministries run. And it is touted as a positive thing when the president gives his officers, so appointed, significant autonomy to exercise powers in their offices. And I think if we celebrate that as a positive milestone, we must also be willing to match it when things have not gone right, that we take responsibility over the same.
Okay, finally, do you think it is time the president stepped in? A lot has been said about the Ministry of Devolution. As a matter of fact, as you rightly put it, when the president was giving the State of the Nation address, he gave that report that he released, he got from ESCC, and he asked the people implicated to sort of step aside. Do you think that now President Uhuru Kenyatta needs to step in with regard to the Ministry of Devolution?
I wouldn't allow me to avoid talking about the ministry specifically. I think no less than 6 cabinet secretaries have been mentioned in one way or another in corruption cases. If you look at 6 out of the entire cabinet, it's a serious indictment on the moral authority and the capability of the government to continue functioning in a way that is consistent with the constitutional promise of integrity. I think in that case, it is important that the president does not only step in, but also consider seriously whether there is a moment of judgment in the national interest that he needs to take in order to refocus the compass of the fight in the fight against corruption. The Kenyans are looking up to the president. I think there is a corruption fatigue in the country, and I think there's an opportunity for the president to be great again in the eyes of many Kenyans. The question is, will he take it or will he let it pass again?
So you think,
it is raining.
So you think the president has a slight chance of salvaging this whole scenario?
He has a huge chance. Ultimately, he's the president of the Republic of Kenya. Kenyans will wait for the government to act and support the government in that clarion call to root out corruption. Kenyans, we always press on Kenyans to act. We need to have Kenyans be able to detect, disrupt, and desist from corruption. But they need to get the cue from the commander-in-chief, the chief executive of this republic, and senior officers, that when they act as whistleblowers, whether within government, as junior officers or not, they will be protected by the law. But even more importantly, the people whom they bring to light as corrupt will face the full force of the law and will not just go through the dance halls of the court system, but will be prosecuted, will be charged, will find their way to the places where we keep criminals, because ultimately we must look at corruption as a criminal act on the lives of Kenyans, compromising our right to service delivery and our nationhood.
Michael Orwa from Society for International Development. Mike, if you will, please stay with me because you're supposed to be having this conversation alongside Beatrice Elachi, nominated senator. She's just walked into the studio. We'll have this conversation in a few minutes. So if you will, please stay with me. We'll have that interview in a bit now. 15 civil society groups led by Transparency International Kenyan chapter have issued President Uhuru Kenyatta a 30-day ultimatum to reshuffle his cabinet. This follows increasing concerns after majority of cabinet secretaries have been implicated in corruption scandals in the recent past. The organizations believe sending home cabinet secretaries implicated in graft will send a strong message of his commitment to fight corruption in Kenya.
That Kenya has in recent days become a hotbed of corruption scandals is a state of affairs which the civil society says requires immediate action from none other than the head of state himself. And they want him to begin stamping his authority by kicking devolution cabinet secretary Waiguru out of the cabinet.
We have lowered the standard of our constitution from an ethical standard to a criminal standard. And the criminal standard says that it is only that person who has been proved guilty beyond reasonable doubt who should be taken action against.
On matters that have to do with procurement or finance, have nothing to do with a cabinet secretary. We do not get involved. In fact, if I was to get involved at all in procurement, it would be regular.
Led by the Kenya chapter of Transparency International, the civil society groups have termed as flimsy Waiguru's defense that she is not personally responsible for the massive graft reported in her ministry, arguing that Waiguru should lead her alleged corrupt juniors on the exit door from the ministry.
If a cabinet secretary can be held and can be acknowledged for putting toilets in Kibera, the same cabinet secretary can be held responsible for using pens that are inflated. I think that is the level of integrity that we need to see in our offices, in our public services, and that is the spirit of Chapter 6.
Motion, a process to review all public procurements done in the last 3 years to establish if there may have been any malpractices similar to those reported in the devolution ministry. They also want an immediate and systematic lifestyle audit of all public officers, starting with the CSs down to their permanent secretaries and other juniors, to establish if they may have indulged in graft. Further, Transparency International now says even cabinet secretaries recently cleared of graft by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission should also be sent home, since their public image is already tainted.
It doesn't even matter that they have been cleared of any wrongdoing or not. It matters that Kenyans see them, perceive them, and know that money has been lost under their watch, even though the institutions that they have entrusted with unearthing the truth and punishing these people have let them down.
Should President Kenyatta fail to heed their demands in 30 days, then the civil society groups say they will lead Kenyans in demanding that he dissolves the cabinet. Muremi Mwangi, KTN News, Nairobi.
You're watching KTN Prime, and we thank you for staying with us. As earlier promised, we now have Beatrice Elachi, nominated Senator Majority Chief Whip, as well in studio with us. We're looking at the issue of corruption. How committed is this administration in fighting corruption? Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us on KTN Prime. So that is where we begin. Is there a commitment within this administration to fight corruption?
Yes, there is. And the commitment, I think, started when the president himself took the list to Parliament. I think that's where we started. And what we've been saying, especially in the Senate, is that when you bring a list, for example, the president brought in a list, we did not agree with the list. Reasons were the institution that has been given the powers to take care of corruption in this country did not do its job right. When you investigate others and you bring in a list where you have on one person preliminary, the other person you're still doing more investigations, and the other person you're like clearing their files to take it to the DPP, then it means that person does not need to step aside at that time, but to wait until you finish your investigations and then say, we have issues with you, with misappropriation of either within your docket or within your ministry, and therefore now we hereby want you to step aside because now we have allegations to take to the DPP.
Okay.
But what did we do as Kenyans? We were, yes, excited that we have a list, we have something that we are taking now straight, and we will ensure that we will see heads roll.
Okay.
But at the same time, let us not just also blame the ESCC. I think they have also, in all the different governments I've seen, I think this is the first ESCC that has done its best to bring more cases of corruption forward.
So, if I'm hearing what you're saying correctly, you disagree with the fact that some cabinet secretaries stepped aside to pave way for investigation with the first list?
Of course.
Because
the Senate disagreed.
The Senate disagreed?
It disagreed.
Is there a commitment? Is this government willing to go full length to fight corruption?
Yes.
The government is willing
The government is willing. And I know when I sit here, everyone looks now at Waiguru as a person.
Yes.
That is why we are losing it.
Yes.
Because now we bring in sort of a mob justice. And yes, we have a sword that has to take you both ways.
Okay.
But I'm saying, if you want to be just and fair also, just the way, again, the articles in the anti-corruption says, you must appreciate first, this person has to go full a trial.
Okay.
But what have we done?
So they have to go through the full trial before they even step aside?
No. Full investigations.
Okay.
And you must step aside now when we know, Linda, you have misappropriated funds.
Okay.
Now, the problem we have in the Ministry of Devolution is that we have now politicized the whole process, that even Kenyans now do not know. When we remove, for example, yes, Waiguru go, then after that, what next?
But you see, when you say we've politicized the entire situation, in all fairness, it is true, money has been lost in that ministry.
Yes, so and nobody has denied that, Linda.
Okay. So from where you stand, should Waiguru step aside or not? Listening to your argument from the time we began this conversation.
From the time I began, she cannot step aside until ESCC tells her, look here. And she has gone through that process.
Okay.
And I think when they brought the report, really, because that's where we are saying, look at the processes. I want us to appreciate our new constitution, that there are processes. If Halake, the CEO of the anti-corruption, has brought back a report and still handed over it to Waiguru, what was he supposed to do? He was supposed to tell Waiguru, I have this report, I have allegations that I need you to step aside. But he did not. He told her, I have this report. You have your officers, who I know have now been, most of them removed so far, who have misappropriated resources in your docket. And therefore, first of all, we need to differentiate the two.
Okay.
That while we tell Waiguru to step aside, maybe because it stops on her,
the back ultimately
stops on her.
With
we
the
need first
secretary.
of all,
yes,
to say that, look, you are not stepping aside Waiguru because you have stolen or misappropriated. You are stepping aside because your officers in. And I think now the process has started well.
Okay.
When the PS now goes to ESCC, I think now we have started the track in the right manner. That now, Mangiti, first you say, you are the accounting officer. You signed the documents. Even the ones you brought in Parliament have been signed with you. And therefore, carry on, because there's one thing we always say in this country, and that is why, you know, in this country, I think because of our politics and ethnicity, we have sort of made the country look so different that we refuse to look at realities. And I'll give you one example.
Okay.
Linda. I'll give you one example.
Go.
We started with Kidero, and I'm sorry to say that here in the studio, but I'm from Kakamega. Sugar. We screamed the billions, the what, but has anyone ever followed up? No, I can see Kedero comfortable. doing his work, continuing. And I'm not saying you go for Kidero. I'm saying we have left the law to follow course.
Okay. Fair enough. We have left the law to follow its course, and I hear you.
Yes.
But here's the thing, why a lot of Kenyans are saying the cabinet secretary needs to step aside. In as much as you're saying the whole process has to take its course. On December 2nd, 2014, State House released a dispatch, and that dispatch extended the powers of cabinet secretaries in this country. Basically, it included management of financial and procurement functions. It also included oversight in sanctioning procurement, formerly a preserve of principal secretaries. Then they were also to approve work, procurement and cash flow plans and play a greater role in personnel, particularly in decision of hiring and firing and promotions. Here is where the concern is coming in. During that time, NYS lost 791 million between December 2014 and April 2015. During that time, Devolution Cabinet Secretary Waiguru moved the power to incur expenses from the Director General to his deputy, which essentially means, Mheshimiwa, she used the dispatch, the instructions that were in the dispatch.
And she did what?
What she did, she moved the powers to incur expenses from the Director General to his deputy. Why? Because this dispatch had given her the powers to handle human resource and personnel. Are we agreeing on that?
We are agreeing on that.
Okay.
Now I want to come to that. After she removed the powers from the DG to the deputy, did we ever follow to understand why?
Okay.
Because now we are saying money disappeared in December. Who was the IO at that time?
Money disappeared from December 2014 to April 2015.
Who was the IO?
Wait, during the period when this dispatch had just been released.
When that time, she had not changed the IO. So DG was the one in that process. And I'm not saying he's culpable. I'm not saying he's culpable.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, during that period, DG was responsible.
Okay, here's my argument though. So if she used bits of the dispatch that gave her power to handle human resource, that same dispatch gave her the power to manage financial and procurement functions and gave her oversight in sanctioning procurement, formerly a preserve of principal secretaries. So if at that time she used the dispatch, the directives of the dispatch, and changed some of the human resources and some of the people who worked for her, then if indeed we are working with the dispatch, why can't she then take responsibility and say, okay, fine, let me step aside as the cabinet secretary because essentially this is my ministry and that dispatch gave me the powers to manage financial and procurement functions.
While that dispatch was given, and it does not mean when a dispatch is given that you cannot appreciate and respect also the Constitution, what it says. And I think what Waiguru did was to respect her PSS, and they continued to date to do what the Constitution has ascribed to them. Because when you look at all the documents that have been signed, I haven't seen her powers of the dispatch that came from State House, but I continue seeing the PSS signature in all the LPOs, whatever. It's him.
So you maintain the finger should not be pointed at Waiguru?
And I'm not saying she should not be questioned or leave.
Okay.
All I'm saying, we must appreciate the processes. And at the same time, we must ask ourselves as Kenyans, because this was a ministry that was lumped into 5 good ministries. Now, what Kenyans we have done, we did not look apparently to the work Waiguru was doing. What we decided to look was how much money goes to this ministry. Now, the money is spread to this ministry. We have the money that goes to the youth fund, the women fund, and all that.
Okay.
And for me, what I can recommend today, so that whoever next comes in must now learn how to understand and to work within, is that then let us split this ministry. It seems to be a huge ministry.
It's a huge ministry.
And it needs to work for more services than other ministries. and therefore split the ministry, let the youth and the women go one side, let planning do something else, and let devolution stand on something else.
Just before I let you go, allow me to bring in Michael Oro, is joining us from our I&M studio. Michael, you've listened into the conversation we've had with Mheshimiwa. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Mheshimiwa. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
I was a little bit concerned and confused by Mheshimiwa at the same time. One, she said Waiguru cannot step aside. Then she later said if she steps aside, it is not because she's guilty. But what worries me most is that it is developing into a script of where nobody is denying corruption, wrongdoing, thievery, kleptocracy, and all related relatives of that word. We are going into a space where, look, why are you not mentioning others? Yes, you are talking about me, but why is the spotlight only about me and my ministry? I think it's really sad, and Linda, I wouldn't want this conversation, and I believe many Kenyans are not disgusted by the levels of corruption because of the personhood of Anne Waiguru. Anne Waiguru is a Kenyan, she was appointed, she can be disappointed. And the fundamental question is, what kind of society do we want when Anne Waiguru has left office? What kind of devolution cabinet secretary do we want after if Anne Waiguru has left office? For me, that is the bigger question, that she has fallen short of the expectation as a manager and as somebody with a political responsibility. It's a huge ministry, admittedly, yes, but it's also the ministry that has a predominance or a lion's share of the corruption issues that are showing up. She pointed out this week that it is not why is everybody focusing on the devolution ministry when the rest of the departments and government ministries are actually performing worse? In fact, from a disclosure perspective, that was exciting. But it's also worrying because we have reached a level where there is no denial of wrongdoing. It is just a concern by those mentioned that they are the only ones being targeted. So everybody is corrupt. Why are you focusing on me? It's a worrying trend. But what I wanted to say, Linda, is this. The political class, and Mheshimiwa, with all due respect, you belong in that space. We hear this word every time: we are politicizing, we are politicizing, we are politicizing. There is nothing more political than corruption, especially if it is corruption that takes orphans and widows to bed hungry, when it is corruption that ensures that people like Alex Madaga stays in an ambulance for 18 hours and are turned away twice in a national referral hospital, which falls under a Ministry of Health that could not account for 23 billion Kenya shillings in one financial year. And the best we do as the political class is to rise up and shut down the Auditor General reports and put him to task to prove. We need to stop saying it is politicizing. When you send me to bed hungry, when you do substandard roads and you are paid twice the amount, when you take food from the hands of orphans, that is political. Because politics is the determination of who gets what, how, why, and when, and anything that stands between the access to those resources.
Okay, Michael, we hear you. Michael Oro from Society for International Development joining us from our I&M studio. Michael, thank you so much. Mheshimiwa, I'll give you the final word.
Final word, Michael.
Yes, listening to Michael.
I don't think anyone has stepped on the doorstep of the Auditor General. I think as a Senate, we've also been very consistent on some of, and why we do that is that we want to set a precedence within the new constitution that people can appreciate. I know it will take a while for people to understand, but I think also the civil society must, we were part of the same team to ensure we get a new constitution. It has processes that we know sometimes are very wanting. I mean, you'll wonder, how do you push this process? How do you ensure the judiciary also listens to what you really want as Kenyans? But then, in the end of the day, I think what we are saying is that as a government, we've appreciated, yes, there's a challenge. And we took this challenge, not from this government. And, you know, and that's why I'm saying, Kenyans, Why can't we focus and ask ourselves, we've had all these challenges for 50 years. We've talked about this corruption. Every person who comes in, even the leaders who are coming, all of them really, if we start auditing them for real, everyone has a skeleton.
Okay, but
so I don't know, I don't, yeah.
But you still maintain that Waiguru has to wait for processes to take place, the entire process?
Processes have started. Linda, processes have started.
Processes have started.
Let's see how it goes.
And you
let us see where it ends.
And you as the Senate disagree with the fact that the other CSS steps aside?
We disagree completely.
I
know we even called the commissioners and we really questioned.
All right. Betu Zelachi, nominated Senator, thank you so much for creating time to speak to us on KTN Prime. You're watching KTN Prime and we thank you for staying with us as well. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. Sending tourists to my motherland, Kenyan tour operator daring in Norway. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with KTN Prime. Let's now cross borders into Tanzania. And Dr. John Pombe Magufuli has been sworn in as the 5th president of Tanzania. Magufuli was inaugurated this afternoon in a colorful ceremony witnessed by regional leaders, among them Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, and Jacob Zuma of South Africa. Magufuli took the oath of office alongside the country's first ever female vice president, Samia Suluhu Hassan. Here now is Rita Tinida with a report from Dar es Salaam. Not even the rainy weather could dampen the mood of Tanzanians who turned up in their numbers in full pomp and color at the Uhuru Stadium in Dar es Salaam as the country kicked off another political chapter. A week after being declared the winner of one of Tanzania's most hotly contested polls, it was time for the former chemistry teacher, Dr. John Pombe Joseph Magufuli, to scale to the highest political office in the land by being sworn in as the 5th president of the United Republic of Tanzania. The inauguration ceremony, which was attended by thousands of people, was graced by heads of state from the East and Southern African regions, among them Kenya's Uhuru Kenyatta, Rwanda's Paul Kagame, Uganda's Yoweri Museveni, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, South Africa's Jacob Zuma, and Edgar Lungu of Zambia. Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, who is retiring after serving the maximum 2 5-year presidential terms, took his last ride on the ceremonial Land Rover amid cheers. Before he inspected his last guard of honor as president. Then, what the country had been waiting for. Amid cheers, 56-year-old Magufuli took the all-important oath of office. He was then handed the instruments of power, the Constitution, and the symbolic leadership instruments, a spear and a shield. And with that, John Pombe Joseph Magufuli became the 5th president of Tanzania. President Magufuli inspected his first guard of honor. The president was inaugurated alongside Tanzania's first female vice president, Samia Suluhu Hassan. Magufuli, who campaigned on an anti-corruption platform, began his presidency with a pledge.
Nitafanya kazi kwa nguvu zangu zote kwa kumtanguliza Mungu mbele ili yale tuliyoyaahidi tuyatimize bila kubagua vyama vyetu, dini zetu wala makabila yetu.
To the opposition,
ninyi mlikuwa washindani wangu, si wapinzani wangu. Maana sote tulikuwa na lengo la kujenga nchi moja. Kilicho mbele yetu sasa ni wajibu na deni la kuwatumikia Watanzania wote bila kujali makabila au dini. Sasa ni kazi tu.
Magufuli won the elections with over 58% of the votes, defeating the opposition, Chama cha Demokrasia na Maendeleo, Chadema party candidate, 62-year-old Edward Lowassa, who garnered 40% of the votes. Chadema rejected the poll outcome, claiming that the election was rigged.
Thank you for keeping it KTN. It's time for business. I'm Joy Doreen Bira. Safaricom, Kenya's lead mobile service provider, today released its half-year results with a 15% growth in profits before tax of 38 billion shillings due to increased revenue from M-Pesa and data. Safaricom's chief executive Bob Collymore also noted the network's increased voice usage was as a result of reduced prices on 2G calls for its customers. We have more.
Because there are 3.5% more of Safaricom's customers making voice calls in this half year compared to last year. Despite posting sluggish growth in the previous half-year results, revenue generated from voice this year grew to 45.2 billion shillings, attributed to lowly priced calls by the network on both local and international call rates, which make up more than half of the total revenue.
We have continued to invest in the network and in innovation. And we've seen significant improvement in voice and data quality. Added 236 2G sites and 379 4G sites in 14 counties.
Safaricom also benefited from a 14.9% increase in its customer base to 25.1 million subscribers in the period. Earnings before interest, taxation, depreciation and amortization, key measure for telecoms, rose 15.8% to 38.8 billion shillings from 33.5 billion, around the top of the range for global telecoms.
We have regionalized the sales operations of the business in order to get us closer to our customers and to pursue our strategy of customer first.
However, compared to same period last year, Safaricom's free cash flow slagged to 9.5 billion from 15.48 billion, indicating increased spending by the company. Expenditure on the big box that was later shelved to relook at its rollout strategy, construction of the National Police Security Network, and the setup of an M-Pesa Foundation and Academy to foster the education partly explains the reduced cash flow from the company. The success and 24% growth of M-Pesa in the half year and a review saw the number of active customers increase to 15.7 million, generating 19.4 billion Kenya shillings.
3G coverage is now reaching 73% of the population, up from 60% this time last year. And 4G, in addition to Nairobi and Mombasa, is now available in a total of 14 counties across the country.
Going forward, the company is looking at raising the stakes to a platform-based company with more collaborations with banking institutions' mobile phone partnerships. This it expects to rake in another 750,000 users in the second half, with the scope for mobile penetration in the country expected to grow to 100% from the current 84%. Joy Doreen Bira, KTN Business.
Talk of wanton borrowing and Kenya's deteriorating debt position has been all the rage over the last few weeks, following reports of runaway state expenditure, massive corruption and wastage of state funds. The debate took on fever after the Treasury admitted to a cash flow crisis that rendered the state unable to meet its obligations, and the decision to borrow a further $600 million only added credence to the claims that the country was teetering on the brink. But the International Monetary Fund has rubbished these claims, saying Kenya's debt position remains sustainable and within reasonable limits. Speaking during the presentation on regional economic outlook for sub-Saharan Africa today, the fund said Kenya's debt position was stable and not at the risk of distress. The fund also pointed out that all the borrowing was being done in line with the government's medium-term targets. At the same time, officials from the fund are warning state officials to temper their desire to lower interest rates quickly. Treasury has been on record calling for speedy reductions to the interest rates in a bid to spur the sluggish private sector.
Situation of distress. We all would like interest rates to always come down and stay low, but the only way to make that sustainable is through a policy mix that ensures macroeconomic stability. So if interest rates go down very quickly and then they pick up again, that will create a lot of uncertainty and damage to the credibility of policies. Now I think the situation is stabilizing, and that's why the rates are coming down, but we are confident that the government is taking all this into account to make sure that any further reduction in interest rates will stay stable in the future.
Now we'll take a look at the money market, see how the Kenyan shilling fared against other currencies, and a look at the Nairobi Securities Exchange performance today.
The Financial Report in association.
It's now time for sports. My name is Moses Wahisi. Good evening. The National Olympic Committee, Kenya's chief de mission for the next year's Olympic, have claimed that NOC will use over 632 million to send a team to the next year's Olympic Games in Rio. Primary team of 76 officials together with 118 athletes are expected to be ready to represent Kenya at the Brazil Olympics, and that is next year from 5th to 21st of August.
We have projected to take a team of 118 athletes and about 76 primary team officials. That makes about 176 or so 194, sorry. And the total cost for that assignment amounts to 632,869,707. That is preparation, qualification, and actual participation in the games. But for specifically the qualification process, having had several qualifications, we have a budget that we have already presented to the ministry amounting to 123,943,026. That is the money that is required to send teams for qualification. The accreditation process for the games commences on 1st of December. So all the officials, all the athletes who are likely to participate in Rio will have to undergo through an accreditation process from 1st of December, and the deadline will be on 29th of April.
Former Africa FBO title holder Fatuma Zarika has urged the government to intervene and help improve the state of boxing here in the country. Zarika, who is preparing for the boxing under the Stars tournament that is scheduled for the 14th of November, has also expressed her worry about the lack of sponsors in the sport.
For months now, a number of boxers are preparing for the upcoming boxing and the Stars tournament, which will take place at the Carnival Grounds on 14th of November 2015. Among the boxers are two ladies, and one of them needs no introduction. Former Africa FBO title holder and WIBF bantamweight champion Fatuma Zarika has been training with the team for 2 months now, and she did not hesitate to explain what ails the industry.
Ningependa kuomba at least gava yetu pia iweze kutuangalia, sababu tunaomba tu at least waweze kuingia kwa sport. Juu boxing kusema kweli ni kila kitu kwa maisha yetu. Juu sisi kama professional boxer tunaomba pia usaidizi, at least juu ukienda nje unainua nchi yako juu.
Problems which have been amplified by the fact that there are no sponsors. Zarika, who has represented the country in various fights, however does not regret her journey so far.
Nimewakilisha Kenya ambapo unajua vizuri sana. Hiyo ni kazi ambapo nimefanya. Nijue uwezo wa Mwenyezi Mungu ndio kwa maana nimefika hapo. Pia nimewakilisha Kenya, nimeenda nje, nimepigana, nimerudi, vitu kama hizo, na nimepata belti kadhaa. Unaona? Hizo ndio vitu zenye ambapo naweza jivunia.
And what does the future hold for her?
Katika miaka miwili ijayo Juu kitu nyamoko naomba tu Mungu anipatie nguvu mpaka hizo miaka 2 zijayo at least ni pia unajua miaka inaenda na pia unaachia watu wengine pia.
For a number of years now, the state of boxing in the country has been wanting. But with tournaments spicing the boxing menu, there just might be some light at the end of the tunnel. Abula Ahmed, KTN Sports.
KTN Weather.
Right, so on KTN Prime tonight, we asked you a big question if you support the demand by some members of parliament that President Uhuru Kenyatta should send Waiguru packing. Let's sample some of your views. Mutiso Ndambuki says, stepping aside is a sign that Waiguru respects herself and Kenyans. Anthony Muhindi says, we need to get our senses back and stop this mob lynching. Let the CS clean her ministry. Galgalo Boru says, oh no, she must stay until the law takes its course instead of people speaking many words. Faith Baraza says, kama si sasa ni sasa hivi. And finally, Kaburu Miriche says, no, we should wait for the corruption investigation experts to give their verdict. Some of your feedback on our big question tonight. We thank you so much for writing in and for being part of KTN Prime. That's where we leave it. Thank you so much for watching. For those of you on KTN News, Inside Somalia begins right now with Kasim Mohammed. Have a good night.